A long time ago, when the sky and the earth still spoke to one another, the boundary between heaven and the fields was thinner than a whispered secret. Above, stars moved like bright threaded beads on a loom. Below, the world smelled of tilled earth and cooking fires. In a small village hemmed by reed beds and rice paddies, lived a young man everyone called Nulong, the Cowherd. He had no parents to come home to. Once, family and roof had been his. Then misfortune and human cruelty took them away. What remained was the steady plainness of his hands and one companion, an old yellow ox that had been with him through frost and famine. The ox grazed, the Cowherd mended fences, and in the quiet hours, Nulong listened to his own thoughts as if they were distant birds. There was a kind of loneliness in him that was not bitterness, but a hollow waiting to be filled. When dusk fell, and the village lanterns were set like small moons in courtyards, Nulong would sit on the earthen path and look up. The Milky Way spilled across the sky like a river of milk, cold, beautiful, unreachable. If only, he would murmur, someone could look back from the other side. One evening, the ox spoke, not in riddles or thunder, but in a voice as worn and patient as the fields. Tomorrow, it said, go to the lake behind the willow grove. The daughters of heaven will come to bathe there. Nulong blinked. The idea was absurd, a fragment of longing turned loud. Still, a curious and quiet part of him obeyed. The lake was silver as elderleaf, a low mist softening its edges. When the celestial maidens came, they did not arrive with trumpets or smoke. They descended like petals falling from the very sky, garments that fluttered, laughter like bells that had been rinsed in starlight. They moved together in a harmony as old as cloud and wind, and when Nulong first saw her, the world seemed to hold its breath. She was Jinu, the weaver girl, daughter of the Jade Emperor, who wove the clouds and threaded the dawn. Her hair fell like a black river. Her fingers moved with the kind of grace that unties knots in the heart. Nulong, who had only ever known simple truths, felt his chest open in a way the seasons did when spring finally lets go. Jinu looked up and, for the first time in ages, the order of heaven flickered with surprise. They spoke few words at first. It was enough that they could see one another plainly. The honest lines of Nulong's face, the quiet concentration in Jinu's eyes as she traced the pattern of the reeds. There was something rare in their meeting. No ceremony, no bargaining. Only an unremarkable human gentleness, meeting an unaccustomed celestial tenderness. The ox watched with wise, slow eyes and seemed to smile. Love, when it arrives like this, is a patient thing. It grew in small gestures. Nulong mending a sleeve with the precision of someone who has learned to care for things properly. Jinu teaching him how to set a bright new stitch into dark cloth. She learned the rhythm of the plow and the language of the seasons. He learned to watch the sky as if it were a loom, seeing in clouds the echo of patterns she wove. They married in a quiet way, no trumpet, no royal edict, and built a life that was ordinary and miraculous at once. Jinu put down her comb of clouds to weave for the home, simple cloth, embroidered with the motifs she had once only made for the palace. Nulong tended the cattle, the ox nosing his palm at dawn. The children came, two bright, noisy sparks who ran shoeless along the mud wall and chased dragonflies until dusk. Their laughter filled the field corners and turned the house into something that could be held against the cold. Happiness settled on them like dust in a sunbeam. The villagers, who had once pitied Nulong, now watched him with a new kind of awe, not for riches, but for the way ordinary strokes of time had been made holy by love. For a while, the universe accepted this quiet miracle. But the sky remembers its rules. News traveled, as it does, and what reaches a throne sounds different when it is spoken by ministers and courtiers. The Jade Emperor and the Queen Mother of the West learned that a daughter of heaven had married a mortal. In a court that runs on order, exceptions become threats. The Queen Mother, stern and jealous of the boundaries that keep order, decreed that Jinu must return. Her place, no matter how softened by the taste of rice and the smell of wood smoke, was the stars. The morning they came, the air was thin with frost. Jinu clutched Nulong's hand and looked at her children, as if trying to memorize their small details into the weave of her chest. Nulong's throat closed. He felt the ancient terror of being stripped of everything that made him home. When the palace soldiers seized Jinu, The sky roared as if it were tearing. Xinu reached for Nulong, and in that hand's touch there was an entire life. Threads, laughter, small reconciliations after spilled porridge. The ox, old and solemn, breathed deep and then lay down. Nulong crawled to its side and pressed his forehead to its flank. The ox's last breath was a benediction. "After I'm gone," the ox whispered, "my hide will carry the road to the sky. Strip it and follow." It was not a command without cost. It was the last trade a faithful creature could make. Grief does strange things to the living. Nulong wrapped himself in the ox's hide, slung his children into a basket, and began to climb. The world stretched and then narrowed, every step a thread unspooling toward the place where heaven began. He could see Xinu just ahead, the light around her like embroidery, and the ache of almost made him pray for madness. At the threshold, the Queen Mother's hand moved like a silk fan, and the Milky Way opened between them, not as a soft road, but as a river of cold, rolling water, a river that could not be forded by mortal feet. It swept like a scythe through the very air, and for the first time, the sky's law showed its teeth. Nulong and Xinu reached for one another across the new gulf. Their fingertips brushed, and it was as if his heart had been cleaved. Their children watched and cried. The river's white current gleamed like thousands of knives. The Queen Mother, stern and terrible, made the law final. They would be separated, each to their bank, never to live side by side again. Heaven is sometimes less a place of justice than a place of duty. But even the coldest laws yield under certain pressures. The sorrow of two hearts can move creatures to defy order. 1,000 magpies, summoned by the sound of grief, rose like a dark wind. They came from orchard and marsh, from the reed beds where Nulong once walked, and with single-minded devotion, they linked wings until a bridge formed across the Milky Way. Delicate, living, trembling with the weight of hope. On one night each year, the bridge holds. On that 7th night of the 7th lunar month, Nulong and Xinu are permitted to step across, to press their faces to each other's, and to hold for a few hours what the rest of the year denies them. They sit close. They talk in the hush that only love and time can make, and they learn the small consolations of reunion, the feel of one another's hair, the looped laugh after a remembered joke, the way a child's hand can fit into a parent's palm and make grief seem softer for a while. There is sorrow in their story, yes, but there is also a quiet heroism. Their love is not a triumph over the cosmos so much as a patient resistance, the way ordinary choices, to stitch a hem, to boil a pot, to chase a sick chicken back into a pen, can become an act of worship when done for someone you love. They are remembered not because they defeated the Jade Emperor, but because they chose each other again and again despite the cost. Over the centuries, people looked up on that one night and understood the language of longing. Young lovers would idle by wells and string bracelets of thread. Mothers would teach daughters to weave fine patterns and tell them the story until the tale itself became a kind of blessing. A festival grew like a reed bed, full of paper lanterns and whispers and offerings. They call it Chikshi, the 7th night, a day for promises and small, brave vows. If you listen closely when the night is very still, you can hear the echo of their footsteps on the Magpie Bridge. You can imagine Nulong's rough palm smoothing a lock of Xinu's hair, the soft sound of the children's breathing as they fall asleep under a sky that keeps its faith in cycles. The stars are patient witnesses. They do not erase the ache. They make of it a pattern you can return to, again and again, like hands learning to weave. So the story of the Cowherd and the Weaver Girl is, at its heart, about what ordinary life makes of love. The way daily tasks knit two lives, the way absence deepens the small rituals into relics. It asks us whether we too will be brave enough to become bridges in the lives of those we love, to be magpies that, wing by wing, form passage across whatever river keeps us apart. Tonight, when you look up and see the Milky Way like a pale seam across the dark, remember that somewhere two people lean close. Remember that love can be a festival of small things, a repaired shirt, a child's laugh, a shared bowl of rice. And remember, too, that sometimes the greatest courage is not the striking down of heaven's rule, but the steadfast holding to one another until the magpies themselves decide to help. Pause. Let the last sentence hang, then close with a softer, almost whispered line. They meet once a year, and in that meeting, the whole world learns how to wait